One of the biggest misconceptions about Western comic books is that they're just superheroes, but that is far from the truth. There's all sorts of genres out there, from sci-fi to Western to horror, but some of the most thriving genres that frequently get overlooked are those of the more spicy variety. Now, some folks might clutch their pearls and roll their eyes at the idea of risque books, but if you go into things with an open mind, then there are a lot of great comics to be discovered, and legitimately, I would rank some of these in my top 20 favorite comics of all time. So let's take a step back from DC and Marvel and dive straight into the world of sexy comic books. But listen, this video is obviously not for kids, and I'm going to have to censor plenty of these images to try and make it past YouTube's guidelines. So if you want to see the full uncensored version, then it's available on my Patreon, completely free right now with no pledge required. But all of that being said, it's also pretty damn likely that regardless of how careful I am with censoring, YouTube is still going to demonetize and restrict this video, which is why I want to give a big thank you to Adam and Eve for making it possible in the first place. Now, I'm sure you guys are already familiar with Adam and Eve and why they would be sponsoring this video in particular. I mean, after all, they've been in business for over 50 years, and they're the most trusted name in the game for a reason, with their 90-day no-hassle return policy and 24/7 customer support. And if you don't know who they are, you'll probably figure it out through context clues, or you can look into it when you're alone and not around other people. My girlfriend has really loved our purchases, unless you're her mom, who sometimes watches these videos. In that case, no, we haven't. We've never even held hands. But if you want to look into things for yourself or to really make your partner's day, then just go to adamandeve.com and use the code DRAKE for 50% off of one item plus free discreet shipping to the US and Canada, with some exceptions, and free rush processing. Once again, big thank you to our lovely sponsor for ensuring that this video will make at least a little bit of money. Not to mention that they have been one of the nicest and most chill sponsors I have ever dealt with behind the scenes. So honestly, thank you guys so much, but without further ado, let's hop into the comic that inspired me to make this video in the first place. I first found Stepan Sajic through his book Harleen, which I firmly believe is the best Harley Quinn comic on the market because of its great art and complex character work. So color me surprised when I looked into the rest of his stuff and discovered that his main claim to fame is a DeviantArt webcomic about lesbians in bondage. Sunstone is such a damn good book, and if its logo wasn't a collar, then I would proudly have it up here on my background. Yes, the comic is full of sex, but it's also got so much more going for it than just that, because at its core, it's a fun and engaging romantic comedy that's held together by great characters and a lot of heart. It is an absolute blast to watch the dorky and wholesome relationship between the two leads grow from an awkward first hookup to a deep and passionate love, balancing the gorgeously drawn intimate scenes with nerdy upbeat humor. Now look, the series started in 2011, so even though there are some genuinely hilarious moments, there's also plenty of very millennial jokes. Like, it would not be out of place for someone to mention their heckin' doggo or say, well, that just happened. Personally though, I think the cringe Tumblr humor is actually a great time capsule of that era, but I really think it also helps drive the point home that at its core, BDSM is corny as hell, and that's okay. It's like playing Dungeons and Dragons. It can be intense and a hell of a lot of fun when everyone is agreeing to buy into this fictional world, but at the end of the day, it's just you and your friends sitting around a table pretending to be wizards and doing silly voices. For the record, I play a chaotic neutral bard who always has a mug on hand. Like, even in Baldur's Gate 3, I always have a mug in my inventory. It's that unapologetic dorkiness that really sets Sunstone apart from other spicy literature, because the series constantly showcases that this aspect of the characters' lives is just that, a single aspect. All the characters are normal people with hobbies and relationships, and this kink is just something that is also a part of it. It's not something dark, taboo, and exotic. It's only weird if you make it weird. Now look, I'm not necessarily vanilla, but this is not a world that I have a lot of experience in. But in interviews, Sajic has admitted that he and his wife are a part of the community, and it's really interesting to take a look into that window into the scene that he presents in this book. Sunstone takes the reader through clubs, various equipment, and why safe practices for engaging in play matter. But also, it explores why exactly some folks are attracted to submission and dominance, and just how freeing it can be for them. And speaking of free, Sunstone was originally free to read on DeviantArt, but because that garbage site decided to embrace AI with open arms, Stepan moved it over to Pixiv, where again, you can still read it completely free. And if you are looking for even more sexy stories after that, Well, you can't go wrong with his latest series, Fine Print. In this book, succubi and cupids are both descended from Eros, the Greek god of love and sex. They sustain themselves on a substance called ambrosia, which was historically provided through worship and sacrifice. But as humans lost faith in the gods, these beings must come down to Earth to make contracts with folks in order to generate a fresh supply. Our main character is Lauren, and through growing from an ugly duckling to international supermodel, she developed a whole slew of self-destructive traits, and just continuously makes her life worse and worse and worse for herself, bringing down everyone in her orbit with her in the process. While searching for an outlet to make her pain and regrets disappear, Lauren meets a succubus and discovers that banging her temporarily made those feelings go away. And so, desperate to make that emotional numbness permanent, Lauren leapt at the opportunity to sign the fine print. One problem, though, is that her contract was assigned to 2 cubi at once. This sounds like the plot to a fantasy sitcom, and yeah, it's Stepan Sajic, so of course the comic is full of jokes. My personal favorite is...
Lelia talking shit? I am shocked and appalled. In fact, you should come on my chest real quick so I can have a pearl necklace to clutch.
But even though there's plenty of comedy in this book, Fine Print is a lot more interested in exploring the world of its divine, and it's actually pretty damn neat. So like, cubi and cupids are technically the same species, with one being driven by love and the other lust. A cupid's arrow and a cubi's tail are able to induce a drug-like high in one another, so they're forbidden in partaking because if they're getting addicted to love and lust, then they won't do their jobs of making contracts with the humans and generating ambrosia. However, Hades knew the long-deceased Eros quite well and believes that love and lust actually belong in one another and create the perfect relationship. So he allows for cupids and cubi to indulge in his realm in secret. But also, if love or lust overtakes one another's heart, then they can actually convert. And it reads like an interesting trans allegory, which is wild because the species is already gender fluid, being able to easily transform into whatever they need to satisfy the desire of their the person they're making the contract with. The lore and the mechanics of the universe are extremely well defined, and that's because technically, every book that Stepan and his wife Linda create are a part of the same universe, so there is a lot to play with. Not to mention that characters from Sunstone do get to make cameos in Fine Print, and the Greek gods are explored more in depth in Linda's series Punderworld. Obviously, I am really excited to talk about these books, and they are totally worth diving into. So if this video does well, then maybe I'll make a dedicated video. So if you want to see that, let me know down there in the comments. And while you're at it, why not subscribe? Just like Sunstone, Fine Print is completely free to read on Stepan's Pixiv, but keeping on the theme of demonic romance, Sweet Paprika by Mirka Andolfo is a blast. So in a society of angels and devils, Paprika is a hard-ass editor at a book publisher, and her douchey ex-boyfriend wrote the company's best-selling novel, which is now being turned into a movie. But despite it being super awkward for Paprika to constantly be around her ex during the movie-making process, one of the executives at the movie studio is everything she was looking for in a man. He's handsome, charming, successful, but most importantly, he's clearly interested in her as well. But Paprika's father was extremely controlling and constantly pressures her to be the perfect success-driven daughter. And as a result, not only is she violently mean to everyone around her, but she's repressed to boot, and she's worried that she won't be good enough in bed to keep the exec's attention. The solution? Start sleeping with Dill, the incredibly slutty himbo mailman who has already been with every other woman at the publisher except for Paprika, so by sleeping with him she can take notes and get good. Hilarity and lots of sex ensues. Coming in at only 2 volumes, this comic is short and sweet, because yeah, obviously it's about Paprika gaining confidence and learning about herself and eventually falling in love with the himbo, and it's totally understandable why, because Dill is such a great guy. Like, Paprika first hits him up in a drunk and desperate stupor, but he refuses to take advantage of her. And yeah, it's really sad that the bare minimum of not assaulting someone is enough to be considered a great guy. But okay, even when the hookups are inevitably revealed, there is this great scene of Dill telling the exec everything that he would ever need to know to make Paprika happy. Because legitimately, all he wants for her is for Paprika to have a good life, even if it's not with him. Yeah, look, I'm not going to pretend like this comic isn't formulaic. It is. But it's the perfect little rom-com that I binge in a single night. And my god, this would work so well if it was an R-rated animated movie or a limited series. Like, if this got animated by the folks that did Hazbin Hotel, I wholeheartedly think that Sweet Paprika could be the next big thing. Literally nothing else to say here. If this is the kind of stuff you like, then pick it up, you are going to love it. Next up is Sex Criminals by Matt Fraction and Chip Zdarsky. It's the classic story of boy meets girl, but in this universe, some people are able to freeze time when they come, so when these two get together, they realize that both of them have clock-stopping sex, and they can actually exist within the space together. Suze works at a library that's being shut down by a bank, and John works, conveniently at said bank, and he hates it. I mean, hell, he'll sometimes have a tug in the bathroom and then take advantage of the pause button to go crap in his boss's plant. So with their powers combined, they decide to bang in the bathrooms of the bank's various branches, rob them, and then use the bank's own money to buy the library back. It's the perfect crime. There's a small problem though, because of course there is. See, there's a faction of these freeze fuckers that are worried that their kind is going to be discovered and become government experiments, so they decide to become the literal sex police to stop folks from abusing this power and drawing attention to them. Well, at least that's what they say, but it's more likely that their leader is on a power trip, because she's a police secretary that wants to feel like a real cop, and because her loveless marriage has forced her to learn how to get herself off through the power of Kegels, she actually manages to become a real threat, since she can essentially stop time at will.
We're the cops. The sexual cops. And you just got fucked.
This comic is so damn absurd. There's all sorts of great gags. Well, I mean jokes, but yeah, there's other gags as well, but there's frequent fourth wall breaks and hilarious back and forths between the comic's creators. Fraction and Zdarsky have written some of the most critically acclaimed comics of the modern era, so it is an absolute delight to have Zdarsky joke about the Howard the Duck comic funding his coke addiction, or Fraction choosing to not show a scene in a Pan-Asian supermarket because he just knows that Chip is going to waste so much time by turning every single product in the background into a joke. Plus, I'm always a sucker for moments that change between publications, like Scott Pilgrim did it with Ramona's hair in the full color edition. And Sex Criminals has this bit about how they tried to get permission to use the lyrics to Queen's Fat Bottom Girls, but because negotiations fell through, they would try again for the trade. But then when you go and actually read the trade, now all the sticky notes are talking about a whole new set of hurdles that prevented them from using the lyrics this time as well. It was kind of rewarding that I got new content for buying this twice. Ultimately though, Sex Criminals is a really complex book. It captures the feeling of a brand new whirlwind romance, as well as the complications that come from serious relationships. This was one of the first comics that I ever read when I got into this hobby, and at the same time, I had only just gotten into my first meaningful relationship since high school. Sure, I enjoyed the book plenty, but after coming back to this nearly a decade later, my more mature eyes took a lot more away from it, and I don't think I actually understood the book as well as I thought I did. Relationships are hard, man, but they leave such a huge impact on our lives, and it's wild that a book called Sex Criminals is able to be so insightful and drop banger lines like these.
Everything's gonna be okay in the end. And if it's not okay, it's not the end.
Now let's take things back to the past with Cherry Poptart. It's Archie, but with sex and drugs. And yeah, I know that sounds like the plot to Riverdale, but this is an interesting comic because not only is its creator, Larry Welts, able to perfectly recreate the iconic style of Dan DeCarlo, but Cherry Poptart still has the classic comedic styling of those Archie books. Like, this bit about Cherry recklessly driving a dude's car while he's terrified in the passenger seat is classic slapstick humor. The risque adult part, though, is that she was allowed behind the wheel because she blew him. Cherry is what is known as an underground comic, or comics with an X. They're small press or self-published books that blow past the limits of what's acceptable under the iron fist of the Comics Code Authority. And I mean, yeah, the comic is just straight up porn at times, and that's the reason why I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of this book. As you can tell in this video, I like my spicy books to have a bit more substance, and the novelty of, oh wow, this is naughty Archie, it doesn't have the same effect these days as it did back when it first came out in the early 80s. But I can't stop thinking about Cherry Poptart because I am endlessly fascinated by how influential it was and all the controversy behind the scenes. Right off the bat, Welts was sent a cease and desist letter from Kellogg's because of their trademark over the word Poptart, so after the first issue, the series was just known as Cherry. But also, the book landed in hot water because folks assumed that Cherry was a minor because the comic is set in a high school. But notably, that was never the case, because Welts was clever to cross all of his T's and dot all of his I's by making it explicitly clear that Cherry perpetually just turned 18, and that everyone else involved in the comic is 18 and older. But here's the absolute wildest bit of trivia. Cherry might have actually been the inspiration for Cheryl Blossom. See, just a few months after the release of Cherry Poptart #1, the Archie books introduced the Blossom twins, and wow, Archie comics were always squeaky clean, but here comes Cheryl bragging about her skimpy bikini and asking Betty and Veronica to go skinny dipping with her. Jason even offers them some beers. Scandalous. Absolutely scandalous. Now, take that with a grain of salt because there has never been an official confirmation, but because of the very suspicious timing, it's widely speculated that Cheryl was meant to be a Cherry parody, which would make her a parody of a parody. Cherry Pop-Tart's legacy is huge, and many big-name comic creators have named it as an influence. Neil Gaiman wrote a story for one issue. Yes, Neil Gaiman, writer of Coraline, Good Omens, American Gods, and, a little series called The Sandman, the single most critically acclaimed comic book of all time in terms of awards.
Neil Gaiman? What are you doing in my
X-rated Archie Comics parody? So I wrote that bit before we found out about the accusations. Yeah, that was not on my bingo card. It's so wild just how many creators were influenced by this series, which is perfectly exemplified by a 40th anniversary Kickstarter raising over $160,000 and got variant covers from top-tier artists like Peach Momoko. So seriously, even though it's not often talked about these days, Cherry Pop-Tart's impact on the comic industry is legitimately so fascinating, and I'm glad I got to share it with you guys. One of the creators who spoke about how much Cherry influenced him, though, is Tim Seeley, who along with Sarah Beatty and Rebecca Isaacs made the next book I want to talk about, Money Shot. In the far-off year of 2032, the political climate is somehow even dumber than it is right now. And even though aliens had made contact, they decided that humanity was too self-centered to be allowed to join wider galactic society, primarily because of their interaction with the President of the United States. Another part of the US getting dumber and dumber is science programs getting consistently underfunded and becoming desperate for new revenue sources. Now, also at this point in time, the world of adult entertainment was growing stale. Between deepfakes and specialty websites, practically everything on Earth has already been done, and that gave our main character an idea. In order to continue their research and to explore the cosmos, her team of scientists would be able to use an experimental wormhole generator to seek out alien life and, have some close encounters, which they would then film and release through a crowdfunding website. It's a wacky premise straight out of Rick and Morty with a lot of potential, and the book really shines at the beginning when the crew is establishing their operation. First and foremost, since they're all going to be performing together, establishing chemistry is important, and everyone needed to be fully comfortable going in. They're going to be, banging aliens, so having everyone sleep with each other ahead of time to learn what does and doesn't work with their operation is the easiest problem to solve. Worry about all the biology and the potential for extraterrestrial STDs later. This includes a legitimately compelling bit about how two of the scientists used to be a couple but broke up because the wormhole project was given the most priority and funding at the university that they were working at. But instead of actually talking about their feelings of jealousy and inadequacy, they're going to become co-workers who copulate. Not to mention that during the phase of getting the crew comfortable with everybody, they needed to hook up once again, and they learned just how difficult it would be to separate their old relationship from this new dynamic. Seriously, this opening is great. The problem though is that instead of just making that the focus of the first couple of issues, all of that setup is told via flashback that's interwoven throughout the first storyline. Now, that is not an uncommon storytelling format, and it's obvious that the writers felt the need to get right into the action. The problem lies in that instead of showing this team of triple explorers awkwardly starting out and figuring out their game plan, adjusting to this new and very strange job, the first story arc is about them overthrowing an alien dictator who has learned a secret technique to create a wave of pure destructive energy through his climax with the help of a monk who uses his oversized family jewels as a weapon. Bro, that is just so much to throw at a reader right off the bat, and I felt like the writers just went way too hard, way too fast. Lube up. Ease folks into the absurdity. Give us some damn foreplay. Personally, the weird pacing of this book sucked all of the energy out of my reading experience. So even near the end, where the crew goes on a mission where they come together to become cosmic super gods to fight a space army, it doesn't land as well as the writers clearly thought that it would. But still, Money Shot is an entertaining comic with plenty of good jokes and political satire. Not to mention that it actually makes some really insightful points about relationships, sexuality, and the adult entertainment industry. So while it's not the best comic I've ever read, it's far from the worst. And hey, for all you guys that are into aliens, here you go. It's even got tentacles. Oh, and also, the sequel series, instead of it being mostly about aliens, it's a meta-commentary about intellectual property rights. And Cherry Pop-Tart is a main character. So if you end up reading it, hey, look at that. Now you know the history because you watched this. Now, this one's a bit odd. Growing up in the early 2000s, I was introduced to the collective known as Man of Action through their smash success, Ben 10. Well, one of its creators, Joe Casey, has done extensive work in the comic industry, including a creator-owned title simply called Sex. This book is just so weird, dude. Like, it's literally just a Batman stand-in who decides to retire after his Alfred died. However, because he was never able to develop any sense of a normal life, he's struggling to make that work, and he's extremely repressed in every conceivable way. He was addicted to being a superhero and struggles to stop visiting his Batcave. He also never learned how to be an actual person and connect with others, as most of the socializing that he's ever done was an act, playing up the persona of a ditzy rich guy. But even though this book has such a salacious title, the main character doesn't actually engage in the act of sex. Sure, there's plenty of tension with the Catwoman stand-in, but sex in this book is almost entirely presented as depraved acts for villains and corrupt rich people. And for as much as artist Peter Kowalski gives things a nice noir aesthetic, especially in how he draws cityscapes, god damn I love these, his art depicting characters in the act comes off as lifeless. I honestly have no idea if I enjoyed this comic. It's paradoxically a slow burn, but also a bit overwhelming with the amount of characters and storylines that it tries to follow, with many of them not intersecting until way later. But hey, I like Guy Ritchie movies. A bunch of characters with individual storylines that intersect during a crazy climax is so much fun if done right. I just don't like any of these characters. Dude, this book radiates such a weird aura, and it has an overall vibe of like a midlife crisis. Like, the series seems like it's trying to be something cool, profound, and edgy just for the sake of it, complete with that title being so in your face. Ooh, this comic is called Sex. But the book has a palpable melancholy to it, and it's filled with broken dreams and misconnections. So, why am I talking about this comic when I've pretty much had nothing good to say about it? Yeah, here's the thing. I couldn't put the book down, and I found myself continuously wanting to read the next issue to find out what happens next. It's not like it's a terrible comic that I wanted to keep reading because I'm morbidly curious, but there actually are a few neat things to note, like how we never actually get to see our Batman guy in full costume. It's always glimpses of his gauntlets, or he's fully draped in shadow. His former vigilante life is an important part of the story, but that's not what the comic is about. And you know what? That's actually kind of cool. I also enjoyed the dynamic between him and his old sidekick, because not only has the boy wonder here not given up on fighting crime and has actually gone undercover to take a gang down from the inside, but he's actually presented as just being naturally better at this job than his mentor. I also really liked seeing the various permanent repercussions from living a super lifestyle, like when the Catwoman stand-in has this advanced eye damage because she was always wearing these vision-enhancing goggles while on the job, and now she has to wear these like old lady grandma thick glasses and it makes her really self-conscious. So yeah, there are some good bits, but I got an overall strange vibe from this comic. Again, I'm not sure if I actually liked it, but Joe Casey's Sex at least delivered on a distinct reading experience, which after having read comics as my full-time job for over a decade, you know what? I feel that's at least worth something. But if you're looking for more of that noir feeling, then consider checking out Afterburner, Tales of the Cool and Wicked by Robert Stewart. I'm normally so busy reading stuff from big publishers that I almost never get a chance to read the mega indie self-published stuff. Hell, the only reason I heard about this series in the first place is because he's a fan of the channel that reached out on Threads when I was asking for folks to recommend things for this video. Afterburner is a collection of quick one-and-done stories, so you can basically hop in anywhere. Stewart's style is very clearly inspired by the classic black and white boom of the 70s, and much like many of the underground books of that era, it's R-rated and it doesn't shy away from sex and nudity. Personally, this style of comic was a bit before my time, and while I do have a ton of respect for that era, it's not my favorite. And I know for a fact that because I'm not the target audience for this, I am not the best person to assess its quality. The way I see it, there's pizza and there's sushi. Pretty much everybody in the world loves pizza, but not everybody loves sushi. But the folks that love sushi really, really love sushi. I mean, why else would I spend a month of my life trying to track down the origins of the mysterious Spider-Man 3 role in my award-winning video? What I'm trying to say is that Afterburner is very clearly a sushi comic. If you like looking at these images, then you're probably going to really like this book as well, so you can buy it at afterburnercomics.com, and at the very least, it's really cool. He's a fan of the channel, give him some support. I ended up reading through so many books for this video, and to be entirely honest, there are much more that are on my read list, so I bet I could easily make a second video. I hear Lady Death is great. But yeah, if this video does well and doesn't get me banned from YouTube, then I would really like to make a follow-up. So if you want to see more, then let me know down there in the comments. And while you're down there, why not subscribe? But anyway, I hope you learned at least a little something new, and hopefully, I'll see you next time.